Hey there, and welcome to Financial Planning in Public number 4. This is probably what many of you that have been following along might have been looking forward to, because now we get to transition beyond data entry and inputs and assumptions and actually start looking at plan results and lay the groundwork for future planning in public videos where we can look at and consider different planning scenarios, what ifs, deal with different scenarios that we might encounter, or perhaps answer some questions that you guys might have. So if you watched our last video, number 3, you'll know that, or you'll recognize this screen, which is where we left things. And I had begun to explain the concepts between ideal, acceptable, and recommended plans. There's a lot of information on this page. But really, this is just a consolidated view of all of the inputs that we've already reviewed. So for example, we've got retirement ages, ideally at 63, acceptable at 68. Living expense, ideally it's $144,000 a year, acceptable at $76,000 a year. Ideally, Lillian is able to leave $600,000 behind at the end of her life expectancy. That is a liquid number, so that's in addition to real estate or personal property or any life insurance she might own at the time. Ideally, an acceptable version of that goal is 0, and then we go down the list. What probably caught your attention up here at the top of the screen are these percentages. Over here on the ideal plan, we have a 0% and this word uncertain. Over here on the right, we have 100%, which I think most of us would probably associate as a good thing, but you'll probably notice the word sacrifice here underneath that 100%. And the reason these numbers or these percentages are important, and the way that we think about financial planning, is there are a lot of things that we can focus on, influence, and control in our financial planning and decision making. Things like, when do we retire? How much do we save? What kind of risk do we take? Our health, non-financial matters like that. One thing we can't really control at all is what our future market's going to do. But future markets will inevitably have a large impact on the sustainability of our portfolio and retirement spending throughout the rest of our lives. Because if you're pulling money out of your portfolio to supplement your income and expenses, it makes a pretty big difference whether you're doing that in a market where investments are generally going up versus a market where they're generally going down. And the way that we account for that uncertainty of what returns we'll get, when we'll get them, and in what order we'll get them, is through a stress testing process. It's a mathematical approach called Monte Carlo simulation, but you don't need to get too attached to the terminology here. We're basically just running a bunch of simulations to see how each of these plans, ideal, acceptable, and recommended, hold up in different potential market scenarios. So in simple terms, right now, Lillian is 61. We assume she's going to live to 95. So that's about a 34-year time horizon. So what we would do is take pretty much all of the potential investment market returns that she might experience in any one year relative to her investment portfolio. We put each of those returns in a hat and we mix them up. And so this year, Lillian is 61. We reach into the hat and we pull out a return, and let's say it's a positive 8%. We write that down, put it back into the hat, and mix it up. Next year, when Lillian turns 62, we reach into the hat and pull out another return, and let's say it's a negative 7%. We write that down, put it back in the hat, mix it up. The year that Lillian turns 63, we reach into the hat again and pull out a return, and let's say it is a negative 11%. We write that down, put it back in the hat, so on and so forth. So we basically rinse and repeat this process for each year for the rest of Lillian's life expectancy. So we would basically do that 34 times based on her current age and given her life expectancy of 95. Going through that process 34 times, one time for each year of Lillian's life expectancy, creates one simulation. We actually run 1,000 of those simulations. And what that does is allows us to stress test how Lillian's financial plan would hold up in good markets, bad markets, average markets, as well as markets worse than we've ever seen, and markets better than we've ever seen. So we use that approach to stress test how Lillian's portfolio and then subsequently how her financial plan and her lifestyle would be able to withstand different market scenarios that we might experience in the future. So over here under ideal, we ran 1,000 simulations of Lillian retiring at 63, spending $144,000 a year, leaving $600,000 behind, using this relatively risk-averse portfolio strategy, which only has about 30% of her investments in diversified stocks, gifting to the kids, family trips, charitable giving, sending her granddaughter Lucy to 4 years of undergrad at Auburn, so on and so forth. And you see that in running those 1,000 simulations, we actually have a 0% chance of success, meaning in none of those 1,000 simulations did this set of goals and assumptions work for Lillian. And that's okay, because remember, these are aspirational stretch goals. These are what we would do if we could, not necessarily what we have to rely on or would need to fall back on. Let's compare and contrast that with her acceptable plan over here on the far right. And in the 1,000 simulations that we ran, Lillian was able to meet or exceed all of these goals in all 1,000 simulations. So that's why she has a 100% score here. Again, I think most of us would assume that is a good outcome. But again, as I mentioned earlier, you'll notice this word sacrifice here. And the risk we want to avoid is that we're so well prepared for Lillian's future that she is making sacrificial decisions in her life today, meaning she might be working longer than she needs to, or she might be saving more than she actually needs to. She might be taking more investment risk than she needs to, or she might be able to increase some of her lifestyle goals, like gifting to the kids or family trips or charitable giving. She might be able to send Lucy to maybe pay for half of her, undergrad at Auburn instead of, just, basically relying on sending her to, Georgia in-state school and some of these other different goals and assumptions. So again, what I'd love for you to take away from this is ideal is aspirational. Acceptable is what we would be willing to live with should we need to. Clearly, 0% confidence is too low. It's basically non-existent. But my point is 100% results from the stress testing is actually too high, because again, that indicates that we're sacrificing today in exchange for an overconfident future. And so the goal is to come up with a recommended plan with a percentage somewhere between 75 and 90%. 75 on the low end would indicate that we have enough confidence and comfort in our plan that we can make some small adjustments along the way, that we can continue to monitor and adjust the plan as necessary. But we don't want to be at 90% or above, because again, that would indicate sacrifice of today in exchange for the future. As you'll see right here, the current recommended plan, which I haven't really adjusted, is at 47%. That's below the 75%. So that's why this says uncertain. And what I will do in our next installment of Financial Planning in Public is we'll begin to adjust some of these numbers to get us as close to Lillian's ideal as possible. But we want to get this, this percentage number somewhere between 75 and 90%, because that indicates a good balance between being well prepared for an uncertain future, but still having enough comfort and confidence that we're not relying on a hope and a prayer. So I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to catching up with you in our next installment.